brought up outside of a traditional family. D'Souza is urging the new Prime Minister to focus on family policies, understanding that the family is the bedrock of society and should therefore be at the heart of policy making. It should be made clear that this is not a rant against single parents. I was raised in a single-parent household myself. I understand that not everyone has a choice. This report and the surrounding conversation are more about offering support to families and encouraging positive family life. It is not a witch hunt against single parents, or any alternative family for that matter. The emphasis on the traditional two-parent family may highlight an ideal, a mother and a father, a positive male role model and a positive female role model. But that is not to say there aren't alternative family structures that can also be successful, just that there is an ideal. No family is perfect and there are exceptions to every rule, but the evidence speaks for itself. The Centre for Social Justice also released a report in this area, which clearly demonstrated the effects of family breakdown. Experiencing a family breakdown as a child doubles your chances of failing in school, doubles your chances of getting into trouble with the police, and more than doubles your chances of becoming homeless. In fact, in the case of homelessness, the experience of family breakdown is a greater risk factor than mental health problems or even drug addictions. Official government data shows that in 2021, more babies were born out of wedlock than intermarried families for the first time on record in England and Wales. The Office for National Statistics figures show that 320,000 babies were born out of wedlock and only 304,000 within marriage. It's worth emphasising here, from the perspective of a cleric in holy orders, that marriage is far more than a ring or a piece of paper. It's also a sacrament, the uniting of a man and a woman under God, showing their commitment to each other and to the community, and the start of a family for the purposes of procreation. There is nothing more beautiful. Even from a secular point of view, it's a sign of serious commitment to each other and to the community. There's no wonder that when we go without marriage, families are far more likely to fall apart. There were almost 215,000 abortions last year in England and Wales, the highest number since the Abortion Act was introduced in 1967. If we carry on at this rate, we will soon reach the point where we are ending as many families as we are starting. Countries like Poland, Hungary, and even France have higher success rates than we do when it comes to encouraging strong family life. In France, the state provides families with a range of resources, including money, time, services to help raise children. In Poland, families receive almost £100 per child per month in universal financial aid. And in Hungary, the Family Housing Allowance Programme gives families a grant to buy a new home, along with a whole host of tax benefits. A married couple with 3 children can net nearly £30,000 to set up a home. As a result, they're seeing a baby boom. Birth rates in the UK are down and have decreased considerably since the 1960s. At the same time, it's reported that immigration rates are at an all-time high. Unless Brits start making families again, Britain will be a very different place culturally, ethnically, and religiously in a matter of years. Diversity may be a good thing. The jury's out on the verdict of that one. But we're not looking at diversity of cultures at the moment. We're looking at an inevitable replacement of the British culture. If we truly want to preserve our shared heritage, it's time we remembered the importance of marriage and family values. According to figures from the Ministry of Defence, more migrants crossed the Channel in August than during the whole of 2020. Analysis of the latest arrivals by GBNews reveals that a total of 26,330 have made it to the UK so far this year on almost 700 small boats. More than 900 migrants made the journey yesterday. Joining me now to discuss this, Stephen Wolfe, Director at the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, and human rights lawyer Shoaib Khan, and David Hay, an international human rights lawyer. Now, Stephen, I think you might be a bit outnumbered, so I'm going to start with you on this. Why do you think we've seen such a dramatic influx over the past month?
Well, there are two main reasons. Demand. There is a huge amount of demand to leave the countries of Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Pakistan, which make up the top 5 applications for asylum in the past 3 years. And there are a variety of reasons for that. Of course, some of them are war-torn countries and others are economic. The second is the ability for the British government not to deter anyone who's not an economic migrant and allow those crossing over the channel to effectively have an Uber system with the RNLI and the Navy to bring people over. So the government's policies on deterrent don't work. And finally, you've got the people smugglers, or some people call them traffickers. Then they are the individuals who are seizing the gap there and making vast profits by being able to assist those from moving from whatever country they want to come to into the United Kingdom.
Shoaib, is it fair to say that the RNLI is an Uber service and we are taxiing people over from France to the UK free of charge?
I don't necessarily think, that, that's a correct analogy or indeed a sensible one. What we do is that if someone's in danger at sea, then yeah, we save their lives, and I think that's the right thing to do. And I think it would be quite wrong to argue against that in any way. In terms of why these numbers have gone up, but it's basically a lot to do with this government's policy, a lot to do with its predecessors, a lot to do with UK immigration law. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Rwanda policy that they brought in itself is making people come in. So,
sorry, pause on that point. I'm interested to know why you think the Rwanda policy might be encouraging people to come to the UK.
Because whether or not it actually happens, what people know and what these people smuggling gangs are saying is that, come on, now's your chance. We don't know how many weeks, how many months we have.
So get in before the deterrent. Okay. So you acknowledge there would be a deterrent. Okay. Exactly. David, what do you think is what the problem here? Thank you, Shoaib. David, what do you think is the problem here?
Hi, Calvin. I think one thing that we can all agree on is that the asylum system is broken and it's not fit for purpose. You've got a government that seems more interested in headline-grabbing gimmicks and policies which have been ill thought out and ill prepared, which are effectively only harming us, Britain, and our borders, and helping the human traffickers and harming the genuine asylum seekers. So there is a significant problem. And sadly, there's no magic fix. It's not just one policy or one gimmick. There needs to be a thorough review. And it's something that this government doesn't seem to have done. And that, because of that, what you've now seen is that the human traffickers are actually taking advantage of that. There was a recent, I think it was July 2022, Home Affairs Select Committee report that proposed that the numbers are likely to increase to 60,000 this year. So this number is yet perhaps potentially going to double again by the end of the year. So there is a serious problem. It's not one that's unusual or unheard of. We're an island. We've had problems like this for a long time, but it's one that hasn't been dealt with properly. Okay, so it seems that all of you are suggesting that it's government policies that are at fault. Stephen, you suggested that we are picking people up and supporting essentially these people smugglers by encouraging them. I would suggest perhaps we're going further than that because our boats are going into French territories to pick people up. It's not just a case of picking them up from our side of the channel. What do you think the government could be doing to actually put a deterrent in place to prevent this rather than encouraging it?
Well, if you're looking at a deterrent factor, you have to consider what the government is actually doing. The first is they are working with the French and other countries, some say not successfully, but I do accept that they have had some work with the French government to prevent some of the boats from coming in, but there's not enough being done in Europe and working with intelligence services all the way back up the line to, as I say, through Turkey into Afghanistan. The second thing they need to do is make a clear distinction between the economic migrants and those who are genuine asylum seekers, as the UNHCR says so on one of its front pages of its websites. And what I never seem to see from those who are very pro the immigration system being as more open is a very clear view that there is an acceptance there are economic migrants and they should be returned back as quickly as possible. And to do that means you have to have a successful Rwanda policy. You have to have more returns, such as the deals that are being done with Pakistan, India, and Albania and other countries. But some countries will never accept them back, Iran and Iraq, which are the two leading countries, for example. And thirdly, in this country, you're going to need to have camps that are not set up in city centres or in housing estates, which have an impact on the local communities, but a very clear deterrence where these people are being told you will be there until your genuine asylum seeker application is dealt with. And if you're an economic migrant, we'll put you on the plane straight away.
Okay. Well, David, you're an international human rights lawyer. Do you think there is any incentive for France to be supporting us? Because, of course, they want to get rid of all of these illegal immigrants too. So where is the incentive for them to support our policies?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there is a deal that can be done with France. You know, even if you consider having asylum centres on the coast in France before asylum seekers come over here, there are many things I think that could be done. Why they haven't, I don't know. I'm obviously not involved in those negotiations. But that is one of the many areas I think that needs to be looked at and fully considered. Another, for instance, is having legal routes that the migrants that the asylum seekers can come in. Now, whether that's unskilled worker visa programs, which we don't really have at the moment. So there's legal and safe routes for them to come in, as well as obviously looking at what can be done in France and various other areas. But I think, like I said at the start, there's no one magic solution. There needs to be a number of areas all tackled. And as you said, in terms of deterrent, it's really not there.
And Shoaib, how can we differentiate between genuine asylum seekers and economic migrants?
But by having safe legal routes. And that's been said for decades. For instance, we saw in Afghanistan, I think it would be someone particularly heartless who would suggest that people coming from Afghanistan in the past year or so haven't been genuine asylum seekers. So what did we see there in Afghanistan? Even if we forget the West's role in Afghanistan and why those people became asylum seekers in the first place, there were millions of people obviously desperate to save their lives there. And we had a few flights coming in, people literally hanging off planes, running after planes. And the British government, others, we were literally prioritizing bringing dogs over humans. And so that's what we need, safe legal routes. How are we going to bring these people here? Now, other than them, single men, and we always attack them. Why is it single men? Because it's harder to bring your family with you. It's much easier. You come here, claim asylum, have your
we're making assumptions. We're making assumptions at this point, but thank you for the analysis. That was Stephen Wolfe, director at the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, human rights lawyer Shoaib Khan, and David Hay, an international human rights lawyer. Thank you very much for that conversation. Joining me now is political commentator Reem Ibrahim. Reem, what we didn't get to discuss there is that a lot of these illegal immigrants are absconding from the hotels, the expensive hotels that we're putting them into at taxpayers' expense. What do you think is going to be the outcome of that?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me on, Calvin. It's lovely to be joined here with you. And look, I mean, I think that it's ridiculous that our taxpayer money is now being spent on these migrants being put into hotels. I have to be honest with you, Calvin, I'm pretty pro-immigration. I think that immigration is great for this country. I think that, looking at the way that...
Unlimited?
Not necessarily unlimited. I think, I'll be honest, I think that the real issue is our welfare state. I think that without, with this sort of really comfortable blanket that we allow other people to have, bearing in mind that homelessness in this country with British people is already at ultimate highs, we are now already sort of saying that actually we're completely okay with these migrants coming over and leeching off of the taxpayer when we've got British people in this country that are already homeless. So I think that it's ridiculous that they're being put up into hotels and then they went missing, and I think that there's a complete security issue there. What
is the solution then?
The solution would be, I mean, I know that your guest earlier said sort of having a more liberal immigration system. Actually, with the skilled worker visa and the sort of 70 points requirement, there is already got a pretty liberal immigration system. Yeah. If you've got a job offer and you've got the required education, then you can pretty much come over anyway, which is why I think that the Richard Tice announcement with 4 in 10 Albanian migrants coming over as asylum seekers, that's crazy. They could just come and get a skilled worker visa if they really wanted to. The solution then is I think that we have to control our borders to the point that we sort of say, okay, if you are, we have to distinguish between those economic migrants and genuine refugees. Genuine refugees, I think, have the right to be here. We should welcome them with open arms. If you're an economic migrant, go through the legal routes. Okay, to a certain extent, I agree, but I think there needs to be caps on all immigration, whether it's asylum seekers or economic migrants. But thank you very much, Reem. Plenty more to come on this afternoon on Real Britain. Councillors in Edinburgh have decided the city won't rename streets or remove statues of figures linked to the slave trade. We'll discuss that next, but first, let's have a look at the weather.
This evening, UK weather is looking unsettled as low pressure sits to the west of us, bringing in spells of rain. Let's take a look at the details. Southwest England will see further showers. Some could be heavy and perhaps thundery too, turning windy for a time as well, especially around the coast. Mostly dry across southeast England and London, with clear spells and generally light winds. The possibility of a few showers, mainly in the north. An increasing risk of showery rain across southern parts of Wales this evening. This could be heavy in places and perhaps thundery too, turning windy. Mostly cloudy this evening across the Midlands, with an increasing risk of a few showers, which could be on the heavy side. Feeling quite humid as well, with temperatures around 19 Celsius and winds staying light. A mixed end to the day for the northeast England. There'll be the risk of a few showers, though most places should stay dry. Winds staying light with temperatures around 21 Celsius. A mainly dry evening for southern parts of Scotland, with plenty of clear spells and generally light winds. The risk of a few light showers, mainly in the east. A largely dry end to the day across Northern Ireland, with just some fair weather cloud around. A fairly low risk of an isolated shower later on towards the coast. Overnight, bands of heavy rain and brisk winds will move northwards. A warm and muggy night with temperatures staying in double figures. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness,
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A committee of councillors in Edinburgh has declared the city won't rename streets or remove statues of figures linked to the slave trade. Instead, it'll shine a light on the dark aspects of the city's connections with the British Empire, please. The decision comes following a review led by Jeff Palmer, Professor Emeritus of Life Sciences at Edinburgh Heriot-Watt University, who has long argued in favour of reinterpreting statues of figures linked to the slave trade rather than taking them down. To give his thoughts on this story, I'm joined by Professor Nigel Biggar, Regius Professor of Moral Theology at the University of Oxford. First of all, Professor, fantastic to have you on. But the first question I want to lead with is, why would a statue need reinterpreting?
Well, it's because some people think that Britain is systemically racist, and that systemic racism derives from a continuing colonial mentality. And that this mentality is expressed in our celebration of colonial heroes. So we have to pull down the statues or reinterpret them, and thereby we can repudiate our alleged systemic racism.
It's bonkers. I mean, do you see this as a win? Instead of tearing it down, we're reinterpreting it? Or should we just not capitulate at all and say a statue doesn't need interpreting or reinterpreting?
Well, if I ruled the world, that's my position. I would say, by all means, let's have a debate and the presentation of different views on the significance of statues. Of course, yes, it's a win in that I think it's better that we retain and explain than pull down statues or erase street names. But the problem is that the explanation that is published by statues will, I expect, be highly politically biased. So we still haven't won, but retain and explain is better than pull down or erase.
I'm with you. I'd probably go hardline myself. It's also been announced that Edinburgh will issue a public apology to all those who suffered as a result of Edinburgh's involvement in colonialism and the slave trade. I don't think any of those people are still alive. What is this waffle?
No,
Should they be apologising?
I have to say I find it quite absurd because between us and the period of slave involvement in slavery in the 1700s lies 200 years.
Right.
And between us and then lies the abolition of the slave trade and the institution of slavery by Britain, the first major state in the world to do that. African states didn't do it, Arab states didn't do it, Britain did it, the first to do it. And then we spent 150 years suppressing slavery all over the world. So between us and slavery lies 200 years of noble anti-slavery endeavor. So there's the idea that somehow we now need to repent of slavery or we have to identify ourselves with slavery and repudiate it is crazy.
It is a nonsense. I want to take this back a step, though, to ask a really simple question of what is a statue, or what's the purpose of a statue? Because it seems to me that these activists seem to think it's highlighting someone's level of purity or something, and that if someone isn't pure enough, they need to be ripped down and or contextualized. What is the purpose of a statue?
Well, but people raise statues to folk who are regarded as admirable in some respect. So let's take the memorial to Tobias Rustat in Jesus College Chapel, Cambridge. It was erected because he was a major philanthropist, and they erected it to him as a philanthropist. Yes, it turns out he did invest in the slave trade, but the memorial was not raised to him as an investor in the slave trade. It was raised to him as a philanthropist. And so we raise statues to people who have done something good, and we celebrate the good thing they've done. But like all human beings, every person who is celebrated in the statue will have flaws. There will be negative sides as well as positive aspects. But we didn't raise the statue to celebrate those.
Right. And a statue.
So, for example, just to go back to Edinburgh, Calvin, there are statues to the likes of David Hume, the famous 18th century philosopher, who is celebrated as a philosopher. Now, it happens that he made disparaging remarks about non-white peoples back in the 18th century, as many people did. But he's not celebrated for that. He's celebrated because he's a fantastic philosopher.
Yeah. And surely the Christian stance is that we're all fallen, we're all flawed, and you might celebrate someone's success, but they will always have something negative in their lives too. It's not about it's about looking holistically at a person, isn't it? And that's what history should be, holistic. The final question I want to ask is this a positive case? Will other universities follow suit? Will other cities follow suit in keeping statues up and recontextualizing rather than the Black Lives Matter activist stance of tearing everything down and starting from year zero?
Well, I certainly hope so. And the government's official stance that retain and explain should prevail appears to have prevailed in this case. I don't know why Edinburgh has decided to take this route, but if it's decided to follow the government's preferred norm, then that's good. But the next stage of the struggle has to be to ensure that there is a properly liberal, diverse set of explanations. Because at the moment, it's just been revealed that the membership of the Edinburgh Slavery Group doesn't contain a single historian and contains only people who happen to be progressive and woke. So we need political diversity.
The Edinburgh Slavery Group, just leave it right there. Professor Nigel Biggar, Regis Professor of Moral Theology at the University of Oxford, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on.
You're with GB News on TV and on DAB radio. Next, we'll be discussing the decline of the traditional nuclear family. A new report says we're moving away from the traditional family to something more modern. I'll get to the bottom of why. Now it's time to check those news headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Calvin. It's 2:32. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Some breaking news in the last few minutes. A 34-year-old man from Liverpool has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder in connection with the killing of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. That's from Merseyside Police, and we'll bring you any further update when we get it. Now, Liz Truss is defending her plans to cut the national insurance rise a day before the Conservative Party announces its next leader and therefore Prime Minister. Speaking on the BBC's Sunday with Laura Kunsberg programme, she said it was reasonable that the wealthiest received the biggest benefit. Meanwhile, appearing on the same show, Rishi Sunak said if he becomes PM, he can't rule out introducing electricity blackouts due to rising prices. The Home Secretary says the Met Police must learn from the, quote, appalling mistakes of the past. Writing to the force's new commissioner, Priti Patel stressed the need to restore trust. It follows a number of high-profile scandals, including the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer. Police investigating the murder of a retired teacher, Peter Caution, have found the body of a man. The 75-year-old was last seen in early August in Edinburgh. The body is yet to be formally identified, but Mr. Caution's family have been notified. 2 men, aged 27 and 63, have been charged with his murder. A man has been arrested following an incident that killed an 18-year-old woman and her 8-year-old twin siblings in Dublin. The 3 were taken to Children's Health Island in Crumlin, but were all pronounced dead. Another 14-year-old boy also received serious injuries, which are not believed to be life-threatening. GB News can report that the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has passed 26,000 this year after more than 900 crossed yesterday. The number of crossings have increased in the last couple of days as weather conditions in the Channel improved. More than 200 people have already arrived today. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Calvin will be back in just a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. A newly released report by the Children's Commissioner has revealed nearly half of British children now grow up outside of the traditional 2-parent nuclear family. The report from Dame Rachel D'Souza also found that nearly a quarter of families are headed by a lone parent. What impact, if any, does this have on our children? Joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Gavin Ashenden, a former Anglican bishop who converted to the Catholic faith in 2019, and Harry Benson, the researcher and director at Marriage Foundation. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining. I'd love to start with Father Ashenden first of all and ask the question, what is marriage?
Marriage is a commitment of one man and one woman for life with the intention of having children. And the outcomes of that, despite the fact that we're all flawed and life is difficult and people are complicated, the outcomes are broadly really quite good. Children who are brought up by their genetic parents are on the whole better protected, better loved, better nurtured, and better cared for. If you change that to a different way of relating to people, you find the outcomes are worse. And the problem is that they're worse for the children. And so they're worse in terms of poverty and insecurity, and then later on drug and alcohol dependency. And not surprisingly, they're worse in terms of the way children learn to manage their own lives and find their own capacity for staying in faithful relationships. And we've moved from one definition of marriage to a variety of different definitions. And it looks as though the people who are paying the price for this are the children.
Absolutely. And Harry, I'll come to you in a moment, but Father Ashenden, while you're here, what do you make of the findings of this study?
Well, they're not a surprise. I mean, people my age have known this. I mean, I grew up in the 60s, and so in the early 60s, there was a myth that was put around, and that was that pleasure is cost-free. You can do what you want, and you won't have to pay for it. And one of the problems in this society is it's often portrayed as though it's moralists against people who want to live freely. But it isn't that at all. It's about telling the whole story. It's always been the case. All societies have known that you have to pay for pleasure. And one of the things we've done is to persuade people that not just sex, but primarily sex, but sex and alcohol and drugs can be had without any consequences. And the trouble is there are consequences because of the way in which children emerge from sexual intimacy. And so in a way, it's amazing to me that we have to get 40 or 50 years down the line before finally the government says the statistics are in and so-called free love is actually extremely damaging to children, damaging to families. And what it's discovered is it's damaging to the state. The cost of supporting broken families economically, as well as in all the hidden costs, is just enormous. And so actually, we have to have a rethink about the way we live our lives, and particularly the way in which we do our morality, publicly and privately.
Absolutely. Common sense right there. Harry, is this a direct result of the sexual revolution of the 1960s?
I think that the report has covered ground is pretty well known to most social scientists. I mean, the purpose of marriage, social scientists would probably say, is to encourage men to invest in their future offspring. That's the primary purpose of it. And I think if you sell it on that basis, that's great. And that's the reason why the state is involved in it. It's not necessarily why we do it. But I think that's ultimately the purpose of marriage. But what's changed from about the 1960s, when birth control came in for all its wonderful freedoms that it brought, it also brought in the possibility that you could now sleep with somebody or live with them without fear of getting pregnant. And that sort of edged us towards this idea that cohabitation is fine, it's consequence-free, and you don't need to get married because, after all, when you look at two couples who one's cohabiting and one's married, on the outside they can look very, very similar. But it's what goes on the inside that really defines the difference, and the kind of outcomes that Gavin's been talking about are very clear. So across the socioeconomic groups, across ethnic groups, people who marry, by and large, on average, and it's important to say on average, are more likely to stay together, and their kids are less likely to experience serious problems when they're growing up. So I think that's really what's going on. So yeah, the sexual revolution, really, the birth control was really what changed the game, and we're still coming to terms with that now.
Absolutely. And Harry, looking at the other end of the spectrum here, why do you think there's been such an increase in divorce rates?
Well, it hasn't. I mean, there was a big increase in divorce rates in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, but from about the mid to late 80s onwards, divorce rates have been steadily edging their way downwards. We did some interesting research at Marriage Foundation where we looked at who actually files for divorce, and we've looked at each cohort of marriage. So if you married in 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, etc., and followed people over time. And what we found was that almost all of the change in divorce rates occurs in the first 10 years of marriage. So in the 60s and 70s, that that breakup rate in those early years went up dramatically. And it was entirely also attributed to more women filing for divorce. So there are more women in the 70s and 80s who were frustrated with their husbands who were filing for divorce, whereas now it's the other way around. And I think what's happened, and the reason why we're back to 1970s levels of divorce now, is I think because men who marry now are no longer doing it for social and family reasons. I think they are now deciding into marriage rather than sliding into marriage, which is a social science type phrase, but it's a nice way of describing it. So we're now seeing people really being intentional about their marriage, and that's why divorce rates are so low. And the knock-on effect actually has been that the proportion of lone parent families has actually gone down in the last few years, simply because married families are doing so much better than they were, say, 20 years ago. But the flip side is that cohabiting families are still very much more at risk of splitting up.
Thank you. And Father Ashenden, with the number of children being born out of wedlock increasing, marriages going down, and abortion rates increasing, do you think there's a link here between the lack of religious faith in the country and the decline in our social values?
Yes, I do. We're one of the most secular countries in the world. And one of the things we haven't said so far is that we have double the number of single-parent families of any other European country. And I think there'll be a number of factors. There are always a variety of factors, but I'm sure one of them is our secularization. And the problem with this is that the reason the religious atmosphere matters is because left to ourselves, we tend to do what we think we can get away with. And one of the reasons why this rather awkward sense of public morality has an effect is it's designed to help us behave when otherwise we wouldn't want to behave. And so some level of public stigma is really quite important in order to give us an incentive to do things that aren't in our immediate hedonistic best interest. So we've been mocking religious prurience and religious morality and so-called stigma effect for a long time. But without it, the glue that holds people together and helps add a certain amount of pressure to do things that you don't immediately, that you don't want to do this year, but you might wish you'd done in 10 years' time, isn't there?
Absolutely.
So yes, we have to find some ideology bigger than us to help us behave.
Absolutely spot on there. Thank you. God bless you both. That's Dr. Gavin Ashenden, former Anglican bishop, and Harry Benson, researcher and director at the Marriage Foundation. Thank you for your time today. On to our next story. Should Shamima Begum, who fled the UK and joined ISIS, be allowed to come back to the UK? The veteran Conservative MP Andrew Mitchell has argued that the case for allowing her to return is irrefutable, calling her a child victim of trafficking. He also argues that ministers knew that Begum was groomed, yet nevertheless stripped her of her British citizenship. To discuss this is political commentator Matthew Stadlen. Matthew, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. First of all, I was surprised that you accepted, but I'm so pleased.
Why are you surprised?
Because we've had so many spats in the past. You know this, Matthew. Should she be welcomed back?
I don't know about welcomed back, but she should certainly be allowed back. She's no longer a British citizen because Sajid Javid, when he was Home Secretary, stripped her of her British citizenship.
Yeah.
And I would have argued that that would have been unlawful because my understanding of the law is that you can't make someone stateless. And although she might have qualified for Bangladeshi citizenship, Bangladesh made perfectly clear that they didn't want anything to do with her. Unsurprisingly, she's our problem. She was born and raised in Britain. But above all, if you look at the moral argument, she was a 15-year-old girl when she clearly was effectively groomed and it seems smuggled into Syria, effectively as a sex slave. That's what happened to these young girls. She had 3 children, at least 3 children, who have died. Her suffering has been unimaginable. The idea that you make a mistake, and a bad mistake if it was fully of her choice, but she was only 15, so that's questionable, you then get punished by a lifetime of exile, seems to me, and you're a Christian, a very un-Christian way of dealing with our fellow human beings.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to bring my faith into it. I actually agree with you. I think many of our viewers will disagree, but I think she was our problem. And I think we neglected our duties by casting her aside. What we should have done is put her to justice in this country. But what do you think that justice should look like, Matthew?
Well, that depends on whether she was criminally culpable for what she did. So let's be absolutely clear. ISIS is a criminal death cult. I don't use the word evil liberally, but I think we can probably all of us in this studio agree that ISIS is evil.
Yep.
The question is, did they pull her into Syria as a 15-year-old, yes, she might at the time have said of her own free will, but did they do it against her free will? I would very strongly argue that it was effectively against her free will. So it might be that a court would decide that she wasn't criminally culpable. If, however, she was criminally culpable, then she should face whatever sentence is deemed appropriate by English law and the English courts.
So I think she has gone on record saying that she did choose to live that life. She did choose to be well, let's put it right, she's a terrorist and a treasonous terrorist at that. So the question is our criminal justice system tough enough for people like that? Could we have handled that situation?
Well, I think she said various things, and I think if you read her interviews, it's been suggested that she was trafficked, that she would say now that she was trafficked or groomed. I think our criminal justice system certainly is robust enough when it comes to terrorists. Quite whether our system of justice is able and our police are able to accrue the necessary evidence from what happened in Syria, that's a different question. But if it is deemed that she was criminally culpable, then the evidence is clear. She certainly went to Syria. And if it is found that she was responsible, despite only being 15 years old and despite, I would argue, being trafficked, if it is deemed that that was a criminal offence, she will see prison. And I think she's prepared to see prison. But the idea that someone who has, as I say, been trafficked, used as a sex slave, lost 3 babies, lived 4 years in a prison camp in legal limbo, exiled from her country of birth, the idea that we should somehow continue that misery as a state, I think, is deeply misguided. And Andrew Mitchell is behind a paywall in The Telegraph. I'm not a fan of the...
Just subscribe to it. It's fantastic.
I do subscribe to it. I'm not a Tory myself, as you would probably know from our exchanges on Twitter. But Andrew Mitchell is a Tory MP, and he outlines the case brick by brick, brilliantly, why she should be allowed back into the country.
Reem Ibrahim is in the studio with us as well. I want to get your perspective on this because obviously she has admitted to a lot of things, including not being fazed by beheadings and choosing to leave behind the United Kingdom and fight for ISIS. Where do you stand on the matter?
Well, I'm a little bit less sympathetic than you on the Shamima Begum issue. I think that whilst she is a criminal and that she's a terrorist, I mean, let's be clear about that. She willingly went to go and join ISIS. I mean, you can talk about her age and her being 15 years old. Not many other 15-year-olds go and do that. We've also got to remember she went through the British education system. I do think, though, that I'm not sure about the sort of legality about this, but she was made stateless. While she's a criminal and terrorist, she is a British criminal and she should be rotting in a British cell.
Okay. You look at the grooming gangs in some northern cities.
The Pakistani Muslim rape.
The appalling abuse that took place in some of some British cities. Yeah. Those girls,
it's still going on as well.
14, 15, 16-year-old girls and older. But the children who were abused, they were raped.
Yeah.
So they might have said at the time that they were willing, but they weren't willing. And Shamima Begum, in my view, it would be left to the courts, was not a willing terrorist. She was victimised, and she should be brought back to this country. And as I say, if it is found that she was guilty, then fine, she'll go to prison.
Thank you, Reem. Thank you, Matthew. Interesting points. I think we actually found a lot of common grounds there, but the issue is it's so complicated. That's Matthew Stadlen, political commentator. One story caught my eye in the Mail on Sunday today, and that was an article about a school chaplain who claimed he was betrayed by the Church of England after it branded him a safeguarding risk, not just to children, but to vulnerable people, for giving a sermon on identity politics. There's been plenty of coverage of Reverend Bernard Randall and his journey since he was sacked from Trent College and reported to terrorism watchdogs for defending pupils' rights to question the introduction of a new LGBT policy. He's now taken legal action against the school and will argue that he was unfairly sacked at an employment tribunal this week. The head of Trent College has previously said that the school has been and remains committed to defending the case and will continue to respect the tribunal process and its decisions. The school maintains it was following established safeguarding practice. Interesting. Reverend Dr. Bernard Randall joins me in the studio. First of all, thank you very much. It's good to see you here. But I'm sorry about the reason you're called here. The fact that, well, let's start at the beginning. What were you preaching about? What were you talking about?
I was asked by a pupil to address the fact that the school had introduced this, Educate and Celebrate, but it's similar to Stonewall and other organisations that come in and push a very aggressive LGBT ideology. Right. And people had said to me, how come we're told we have to accept this LGBT stuff in a Christian school?
It's a good question.
I thought it was a very good question and fair, because it's not saying what's right or wrong. It's, what are we allowed to think? So I gave a sermon saying you are allowed to think for yourself.
Okay.
That was the key thing. Respect the people you disagree with. No personal attacks, no abuse. That is unacceptable.
Yep.
But if you make up your mind that actually you want to follow traditional Christian values or other philosophical views on these things, you are allowed to do that.
Now, that's a very liberal sermon. I would have probably said you need to go further and say, actually, this is antithesis to Christian teaching, and we believe that there is one woman, one man in marriage, and that is a sacrament. I would have said go further and go harder, but you were quite liberal. You said you can believe that, or you can believe this. It's fine.
Yes, and I was very conscious that I wasn't speaking to a purely Christian group of young people, and therefore it's fair to be moderate. That's what I aim for. And actually, I am. Yeah. I understand people have different points of view. Yeah. Freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech all mean that everybody's entitled to express their viewpoint. I have my own views, which are clear, but I understand and respect other people's viewpoints. And
so, Father, what was the consequence of that?
The consequence from the school was that I was sacked for gross misconduct, reported to Prevent, the anti-terror watchdog, and reported as a safeguarding risk.
Based on what?
Based on having unacceptable views. It appears, it's not very clear. They said to me, how come you're saying this? And I said, well, it's the Church of England's own teaching. And the fact that I wasn't willing to say it's not the Church's teaching, or I don't accept the Church's teaching, despite being a minister of the Church of England, apparently that was too extreme, too hardline, just to say this is the Church's teaching and that's what we've got.
That's quite literally a chaplain's role.
I thought so.
To teach Christian teaching.
Apparently, the senior leadership of the school disagreed. I think
this is
a chaplain's job is just to say, be nice to people and leave it.
Well, that's what Christianity is all about, isn't it? Being nice, not being good. We won't get into that, though.
No, let's not.
Was this a Christian school?
So this is a Christian school, a Church of England foundation school. So it should have been possible for anybody to say those things, but absolutely a chaplain in a chapel service, a sermon, in an act of worship, should have been able to say, you may take traditional Christian views on these things. OK,
so I'm assuming, because your school sounds horrendous, it sounds like you had an activist head teacher. I won't ask you to confirm or deny that, but it sounds to me a terrible place to work. I'm assuming that your diocese and the local clergy, the hierarchy, I'm assuming they backed you up and they had your back and said, yeah, this is a good Christian teacher, this is a good pastor doing his job.
Sadly not. No. And I'd like to say, actually, in many ways, it's a great place to work. Lots of the other colleagues, other staff are brilliant.
It's very charitable of you.
It's true. It is, and I absolutely mean it. But yeah, the diocese, not so much. So they got hold of this idea if there was a safeguarding problem, teaching the Church of England's teaching, and they said, we need to assess this, and they decided there was a risk to children and vulnerable adults. If they talked to me, I might somehow harm them because I hold the Church's own teaching.
Did they acknowledge that it's the Church's teaching?
Well, interestingly, the safeguarding officer, when she wrote up an assessment of me, said his opinions, Reverend Randall's views, rather than ever saying it's the Church's views.
Did you ever question where you got these opinions
from? The real kicker at the end of the assessment was, because of some scripture supporting Reverend Randall's views, the Church itself is a risk factor.
Oh, my gosh.
So, employed by the Church of England, thinks that the Church of England is a safeguarding risk.
The crux right there, that is the Church of England right there. It thinks it is a safeguarding risk to the people of the United Kingdom, which is why it won't preach the good word anymore.
And I want to say, there are many faithful pastors, vicars, ministers up and down the Church of England.
And they're being let down by the hierarchy.
And the hierarchy, the officialdom, the managerial class of the Church of England is afraid to stand up and say, we have this wonderful thing we want to share with people.
So what are you going to do about it? What's the next step?
Well, the next step, we've got the employment tribunal starting tomorrow against the school, but I have initiated legal action against the bishop and the diocese. Sadly, I didn't want to. Tried the internal means of getting them to realise they needed to make more sense. At one point, the safeguarding team gave the bishop the option, carry on with the safeguarding process, or say, well, actually, it's a theological matter and it's not safeguarding.
Yes.
So the safeguarding team didn't themselves insist it was safeguarding. They were that uncertain about it. They have no evidence of any harm, no victim. There's no allegation of any wrongdoing.
Well,
the bishop didn't take that chance. She said, no, do the safeguarding.
I'm going to have to wrap it up there, unfortunately. I could talk to you all day, but thank you so much, and I hope you win this. Now, it's important for us to note again that Trent College disputes Reverend Bernard's claims and remains committed to defending itself in the Employment Tribunal. Also, we must say that the Diocese of Derby told GBNews Mr. Randall has never been an employee of the diocese, and the licence he held was as a result of his employment by Trent College. The Bishop of Derby is saddened to see Mr. Randall is bringing these grievances and has tried to ensure pastoral care for him. Given that he has started legal processes against the diocese and the Bishop of Derby, it would be inappropriate to comment further. We'll leave you guys to decide what you think of that. You're watching Real Britain with me, Calvin Robinson. Here is the latest weather, in case it changed.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. This is Real Britain with me, Calvin Robinson, on TV, radio and online. This hour we'll be discussing the NHS, or our NHS should I say. Health Secretary Steve Barclay wants to crack down on bureaucrats costing the taxpayer billions of pounds each year. Is he right? And we'll find out which of the leadership contenders strikes the most fear, if any, into the heart of the Lib Dems and the Labour Party. I'll be joined in the studio throughout the show by political commentator Reem Ibrahim. Thank you, Reem. But first, here's the news with Ray Addison. Good old Ray.
Good afternoon. It's 3 o'clock. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Two men have been arrested in connection with the death of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. A 34-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. Meanwhile, a 41-year-old man from Knowsley has been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Olivia died nearly 2 weeks ago after she was shot in her home by an unknown gunman. Liz Truss is defending her plans to cut the national insurance rise a day before the next Prime Minister is announced. Speaking on the BBC's Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg programme, she refused to be drawn on her plans to help struggling families, but said she will reveal them within a week of winning the post. She also said it was reasonable that the wealthiest received the biggest benefit from any cut to national insurance.
It's fair. We promised in our manifesto that we would not raise national insurance. I opposed the decision to raise it in Cabinet because it was the wrong decision. I believe it is the right thing.
You could have quit if you felt that strongly.
Well, I could, but I preferred to stay in and fight my corner because I'm not somebody who quits.
Speaking on the same programme, Rishi Sunak said if he becomes PM, he can't rule out introducing electricity blackouts due to rising energy prices.
What I've said is that we shouldn't rule anything out. I mean, we're facing a genuine emergency. I think anyone pretending that that isn't the situation isn't being straight with the country. And by the way, across Europe, those plans are being drawn up. And I would imagine
we should prepare for blackouts, do you think?
Well, as I said, again, I'm not there. I'm not inside. But what I would say is we shouldn't rule anything out because the situation...
Boris Johnson is urging the Tory party to back the next Prime Minister wholeheartedly, regardless of who wins. Writing in the Sunday Express, Mr Johnson praised the abilities of both candidates, saying it was time to put the national interest first. The outgoing PM also described his last 3 years in charge as tough but exhilarating. The Home Secretary says the Met Police must learn from the, quote, appalling mistakes of the past. Writing to the force's new commissioner, Priti Patel stressed the need to restore trust and confidence. It follows a number of high-profile scandals, including the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer. However, former Met Detective Chief Superintendent Kevin Hurley told us Priti Patel is simply trying to appear tough.
This is a cynical last gasp of a failing Home Secretary trying to prove she's strong in the hope that Suella Braverman doesn't get the job. So what it's actually done is demonstrated yet another one of her failings because it's made us a little bit less safe. All it's done is given the men and women in the front line serving us right now another kicking to further demoralise them.
GBNews can report that the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has passed 26,000 this year after more than 900 crossed yesterday. The number of crossings has increased in the last 2 days as weather conditions in the Channel improved. The migrants have been picked up by Border Force officers. More than 200 people have already arrived today. A man has been arrested following an incident that killed an 18-year-old woman and her 8-year-old twin siblings in Dublin. The three were taken to Children's Health Island in Crumlin, but were all pronounced dead. Another 14-year-old boy also received serious injuries, but they're not believed to be life-threatening. A man in his early 20s was arrested at the scene, and police are not looking for anyone else in connection with the incident. The Disaster Emergency Committee has received £13.5 million in donations to help people affected by the floods in Pakistan. Record monsoon rains and melting glaciers caused the humanitarian disaster. Flooding has now killed over 1,200 people and 33 million are affected. 1/3 of Pakistan is estimated to be underwater. That's an area equivalent to the size of the UK. A man who stole a small plane and threatened to crash it into a Walmart in Mississippi in the United States has been charged with grand larceny and making terroristic threats. Tupelo police say Corey Wayne Patterson took the twin-engine plane and then flew around in circles for hours before landing in a field. Patterson is believed to have had some flight training. However, he was not a licensed pilot. Former President Donald Trump has described the FBI and the US Justice Department as, quote, vicious monsters. It comes after authorities searched Mr. Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate last month. They say they found more than 11,000 government records, including some marked top secret. President Trump made the comments during a campaign rally in Pennsylvania.
The FBI and the Justice Department have become vicious monsters, controlled by radical left scoundrels, lawyers, and the media who tell them what to do, you people right there, and when to do it.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Real Britain with Father Calvin.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Calvin Robinson. Here's what's coming up this hour. Shortly, we'll discuss the NHS, or rather our NHS as it's known, and how to reduce waste and make it more efficient. Health Secretary Steve Barclay has said that £2.8 billion of taxpayers' money could be saved by cracking down on NHS bureaucrats. Tomorrow, it will be revealed who will be the new leader of the Conservative Party, and that will reflect who will be our new Prime Minister. I'll find out if the Lib Dems or Labour Party fear either Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss. The BBC, and in particular Gary Lineker, has been airing its dirty laundry in public again. The BBC is facing a backlash after claims it ordered a senior journalist to apologise to Lineker for blasting the Match of the Day host's anti-government tweets. Is it one rule for Gary and another rule for everyone else at the BBC? And that's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know what you think. Share your thoughts, especially on the NHS. Do you think the current system is broken, and how do you think we can improve it? Tweet me at GBNews, or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us on YouTube as well. Stay tuned. Health Secretary Steve Barclay has announced a crackdown on NHS bureaucrats who cost the British taxpayer approximately £2.8 billion a year. This crackdown entails cutting waste and wokery and moving more managers into the frontline positions so that they can take on some of the administration work currently undertaken by doctors and nurses, freeing them up, so to speak, for patient care. Some of this wastage includes diversity managers on up to £77,000 a year, for example. Liverpool University Hospital's NHS Trust is currently advertising for an interim Associate Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion with a salary of almost 78 grand. £700,000 of taxpayer money on printing virtue signalling staff magazines, including a Black Lives Matter pledge and tips on diversity. And spending over £1 million on staff networks designed to promote diversity and inclusion. These have included tea and rainbow cakes, picnics, a special session about pronouns, and a Filipino martial arts performance. Yes, indeed. So, should we welcome the government's attempt to reduce this wastage in the NHS? Joining me now to discuss this is former Labour MP Stephen Pound and former NHS Trust Chairman Roy Lilly. So I'll start with you, Roy, to begin with. Do you think Barclay is right to clamp down on the waste and wokery in the NHS?
No, not really. I mean, if we put some context around this, he's having a go at managers because it's easy to do it and they can't answer back. I mean, the facts are £2 in every 100 that's spent in the NHS is actually spent administering and managing it. Okay. Managers are 2% of the total workforce. And if you compare the NHS workforce with the workforce of the UK as a whole, about 10% of the workforce is in management, and in NHS it's only 2%. A third of NHS managers are clinicians. So, what do you mean by manager? And if you look at international comparisons in the OECD, for example, the average that the NHS spends on admin and planning and what you might call bureaucracy is 1.5%. In France, it's 4%, and in the United States, it's 7%. I mean, part of the the paper pushing thing that we get criticised the NHS for is a lack of IT investment. I mean, 1 in 7 hospitals don't have an electronic healthcare record. And, the NHS is a huge organisation. It spends about £350,000 a minute. And in a minute, 7,000 people are looked after across the NHS. This is a big organisation. Somebody's got to run it. And, Barclay, why is Barclay doing it? Well, he's a Sunak supporter. It looks like...
well, we can only speculate on the reasons why. But
he's on the way out.
Let's talk about the NHS rather than Sunak, because do you actually think it's fair to be spending £700,000 of taxpayers' money on printing virtue signalling stuff like a Black Lives Matter pledge and tips on diversity? I think most people would agree this is a complete waste of money. And this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, it depends what you think about diversity, and it depends what you think about the responsibility of employers that employ 1.5 million people, where a high percentage are black and ethnic minority. And it depends, how you think you should treat your staff. But also, what I'd like to know is where the figure came from, because I've been trying to find where this figure actually comes from. And, bashing managers it does it all the time. Wes Streeting, the Labour Shadow Secretary, he said that the NHS managers were leeching money from the front line and taking it away from medics. And of course, when he was challenged of it, he spent 3 weeks trying to row off it. It's a silly,
okay, all right. So let's see what
target that people can't resist.
Okay, Stephen Pound, former Labour MP. Do you think there's too much waste and wokery in the NHS, and are we right, or is Berkeley right, to cut down on it?
No, but Barclays is just setting up a straw man to knock down. It's absolute nonsense. Look, I spent 10 years in the NHS as a worker, as a hospital porter, as a matter of fact, at the Middlesex Hospital. There's huge numbers of people in professions allied to medicine, people who are ancillary workers, who are actually doing the work to allow doctors and nurses to get on with the job. Look, the key thing here is the NHS is the third rail in British politics. We're not nationally a religious nation, but the NHS has almost become our religion, and no one can criticise it. I was born on the same day as the NHS. My elder two brothers who were born before me both died very, very young. I am, as you can see, still in fairly rude good health. But the real issue here is addressing the fundamental problem at the heart of the NHS, which is the funding. Demand is elastic. Demand is endless. Supply is inelastic. I'm here at the Royal British Legion in Greenford, and I've just done a quick vox pop. Everybody thinks the NHS is marvellous, it's wonderful, it's brilliant. Nobody can come up with an answer as to how to fund it. And I think Berkeley, by leaning us on, is ludicrous distraction. Sure, get rid of the nonsense, the wokery, the ridiculous
I can't sit here and hear you say that everyone thinks that. We get thousands of... Thank you, Mr. Pound. We get thousands of tweets and emails on a daily basis from people who are saying that the NHS is no longer fit for purpose. It's full of bureaucracy, but not only that, not only the waste, but the wokery too. I'm going to bring in Reem Ibrahim, who's also in the studio with me now. Reem, come on, give me some balance to this debate. Is there too much wokery and waste in the NHS?
There is, and the NHS is not underfunded. We're spending just below £200 billion a year on the NHS. It's ridiculous. Now we've got, I think the figures are 6.7 million people on waiting lists. It's ridiculous. And it's the issue with government-run healthcare. The government should not be running our healthcare system. Let consumers decide where they want to go for their healthcare. Let the people choose instead of handing it over to government bureaucrats.
I think that's a pretty sensible stance. It is a black hole, it is a cash sink. How much money would be enough money, Stephen Pound, for the NHS?
Look, I'm sorry. The real issue here is that we're wasting billions on the NHS by having these internal markets, this competitive system. There isn't a NHS. There is loads and loads of regional NHSs. There are people arguing amongst themselves. Excuse me a second. Why on earth should we be arguing amongst ourselves and setting up... I'm sorry, I'm at the Royal British Legion. We do like to have a tot at this time of day. But look, the point is the financial structure, the way that if you actually have a look back at the origin of the NHS and look at the Gillibo report back in the 1950s, the NHS was structured originally on men leaving school at 15, retiring at 65 and dying at 75, and women not working. The financial basis of the NHS is broken. That is the problem. And for God's sake, why can't we in this country actually grasp the nettle here and say, look, we love the NHS, we adore the NHS, it is a national religion, but the funding model is wrong. It is broken. It doesn't exist in the 21st century. That is, and to come up with some nonsense about wokery, some equalities officer in Liverpool, that is a ludicrous, ridiculous distraction.
It's absolutely not, because people like me who are putting money into the taxpayers who are putting money into the system do not want to know that it's being spent on these Black Lives Matter campaigns or these woke nonsense ideas that are very political, very contested, and should not be anywhere to do with the NHS. It's there for our health. It's there to support us physically and mentally. It's not there to encourage politics. Roy, how much money is good enough for the NHS? How do we fix it?
Well, look, the NHS. Let's talk about life before COVID, so we understand what's happening here. In the 2009-2010 world banking crisis, coming out of that, George Osborne was the Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer. They were in a coalition with the Lib Dems. Osborne cut local authority funding in 2 goes, and eventually it was about 40% in total. The NHS had flatline funding for 10 years. It needs about 3 to 4% to be able to keep pace with what's going on. During the 10 years, training stopped, the bursary stopped, the capital program stopped, the repairs and renewal program stopped, just about everything ground to a halt. And when we got into COVID, we went into COVID with 40,000 nursing vacancies and a waiting list at that time, which was a record of 4.5 million. We've come out of COVID because a lot of people understandably didn't come forward. We've got a waiting list now of 6.5 million. And I looked at the vacancies, the latest vacancies across the NHS, clinical vacancies have gone from 40,000 to 160,000. It doesn't have enough people. Now, you can argue about how it's going to be funded and dicker about with that all day long. I'm not really interested, because you either take the taxes out of your right-hand pocket to pay for it, or you take insurance out of your left-hand pocket to pay for it, but it's still your trousers. You still have to pay for it. Now, if you look at the amount that we pay, it isn't true that we're spending £200 million on the NHS. I don't know where that figure's come from. It's about 150 billion this year. And that includes partly for social services as well. Local government is completely knackered. So the problems the NHS have is it doesn't have enough people. The system is grinding to a halt. What to do about it? How do you fix it? Well, you don't fix it by having some great upheaval and a row over wokery. You fix it by saying, OK, it needs a sustained period of reasonable, sensible funding and some proper management. But of course, now we've got Barclay, who's trying to, tell us he eats 3 Brillo pads for breakfast and how tough he's going to be. We got, it looks like Theresa Kofi's coming in now to run it. I don't know what she's going to make.
We're falling into ad hominems again against Conservative politicians, which I'm not interested in. But what I find fascinating, Roy, is that you said... Roy.
I can't hear you and you can't hear me.
Then pause for a minute and I'll get to a question, then you can answer it. What I find fascinating is when you say that you're not interested in the money being spent. And I think this is the biggest issue, because if we cancelled the NHS, we could wipe out our entire national debt with just 6 months of NHS spending. We're spending far too much money on this. I want to come back to Reem briefly to ask her the question, should we actually defund the NHS? Is that the solution?
Well, I think it's this entire idea that, if a consumer makes a decision to about taking money out of your right hand or left hand pocket, there is a huge difference. If you're pumping money into the NHS using taxpayer-funded money and it's going into a bureaucratic black hole, there's no individual choice. As a consumer, you're able to choose yourself which sort of hospital company you want to go for, which insurance company you want to go with. I really quite like the Singaporean system. It's based on consumers. You as an individual get to choose where you get your healthcare from, and it's all about freedom and choice, not the sort of state monopoly that we have in its current form.
Right, I'm going to come back to Mr. Pound, because I think that's a very interesting position. There are many, many alternatives. And whenever we hear about potentially defunding the NHS or looking for a different solution, the go-to argument is, but we don't want to be like the Americans, everyone's on ridiculously expensive personal insurance systems, it doesn't work. But there are many, many healthcare systems around the world, and a lot of them are actually better than our NHS. So, Mr. Pound, do you think there's a better solution we could look at for replacing the NHS if we can't fix it, if it's that broken?
I think there is. The NHS should not be a sacred cow. It should not be above criticism. We look at Germany, we look at a part-funded insurance scheme, we look at France, we look at Spain, which I think the Spanish model is very, very impressive in this particular. Look, for too long, we've actually felt that no one can say anything about the NHS without being accused of apostasy, and it's the ultimate crime in this country. We have to look at the funding, but ultimately, a healthy nation is a productive nation. If you do not have a healthy nation, you cannot produce the goods that we need for the rest of the country. And this goes right back to the origins of the NHS. We actually want to get rid of poverty, we want to get rid of misery, we want to get rid of those difficulties so we can be a better, healthier and happier nation. But if you don't have a healthy nation, you don't have a nation that is solvent. You have to have that. And so I think we could actually, I have to say, as I said, I'm a passionate, committed to the NHS from birth. But I have to say that the time for a universally provided, the old Beveridge model of the NHS, limitless demand, just keep paying for it, I think that day is gone. Unfortunately, Aneurin Bevan, God rest his soul, is dead. We have to look at maybe a partially insurance funded. Never forget that Freud said that he always charged patients when they came to see him, because if people didn't pay something, they didn't value it.
Yeah,
and I think there's a real philosophical problem there.
Although we do pay a lot to it, we just don't realise we're paying. Mr. Lilly, I'm going to let you have the last word. If you could do so, please, without any ad hominems to any politicians, what do you think would be a potential alternative solution to the NHS?
You can have an insurance system. Germany have a federal system where people pay local federal taxes, but it's still fundamentally a government run. You could do what they do in Spain. Our hospitals, our foundation hospitals, are based on the Spanish model of independence. You could do what they do in Israel, where they've got 3 main providers, and you can switch between the providers, and they have to take you on whatever your health status is. You could do what you do in America, and if you're rich enough, you'll survive, and if you're not, you die poor. So, I mean, you can have what you want. It doesn't, in a sense, it doesn't matter which system you have, because I've been in and around the NHS since before the NHS. I was born before the NHS, and I hope I'll die before it finishes. But if you look at the systems, they've all got shortcomings and they've all got problems. I mean, there are huge waiting lists and what have you now around Europe. The French system is beset with bureaucracy. You know, you can pick and choose, you can match and mix whatever it is you want from other countries. At the end of the day, tax funded, collected centrally, distributed centrally, and spent sensibly on things that matter seems to me to be a very sensible system.
OK, thank you very much. I'm glad we reached some common ground in the end there. That was former Labour MP Stephen Pound and former NHS Trust Chairman Roy Lilly. Thank you to you both for joining me today. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. Next up, we'll be discussing why more younger people are turning to prayer compared to older generations. But first, we do have this time the weather, just in case it's changed.
This evening, UK weather is looking unsettled as low pressure sits to the west of us, bringing in spells of rain. Let's take a look at the details. Southwest England will see further showers. Some could be heavy and perhaps thundery too, turning windy for a time as well, especially around the coast. Mostly dry across southeast England and London, with clear spells and generally light winds. The possibility of a few showers, mainly in the north. An increasing risk of showery rain across southern parts of Wales this evening. This could be heavy in places and perhaps thundery too, turning windy. Mostly cloudy this evening across the Midlands, with an increasing risk of a few showers, which could be on the heavy side. Feeling quite humid as well, with temperatures around 19 Celsius and winds staying light. A mixed end to the day for the northeast England. There'll be the risk of a few showers, though most places should stay dry. Winds staying light, with temperatures around 21 Celsius. A mainly dry evening for southern parts of Scotland, with plenty of clear spells and generally light winds. The risk of a few light showers, mainly in the east. A largely dry end to the day across Northern Ireland, with just some fair weather cloud around. A fairly low risk of an isolated shower later on towards the coast. Overnight, bands of heavy rain and brisk winds will move northwards. A warm and muggy night with temperatures staying in double figures. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So Howie in for Real Britain, Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Calvin Robinson. A survey from the Church of England has revealed younger adults are more likely to pray than older generations. According to a survey of over 2,000 people, more than half of 18 to 34-year-olds say that they're praying during their lifetime, and a third say they've prayed in the last month. The Church says these figures contradict the common assumption that young people aren't interested in faith. Now, joining me to discuss this is Director of Orthodox Conservatives, Joseph Robertson. First of all, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Big fan of Orthodox Conservatives.
Yes. Good to be on the other side.
Why do you think young people are praying more?
Well, I think it's partly to do with the fact that we're living in maybe more dystopian times than normal.
Gosh. Start off nice and light.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's something to do with it, isn't it? I think we all tend to pray when we're at our lowest, regardless of our beliefs. It tends to be something quite cataclysmic that leads us to be on our knees thinking about what could be going wrong and what we can do to make it right. So perhaps it's just a build-up of headlines that are scaring people into thinking that maybe there's more to all of this.
Yeah, I mean, just today we've got the new bird flu. We should all be afraid of it now, just in case
I haven't checked the new one,
human
but
beings.
yes, yeah.
Every day there seems to be a new scary story, Project Fear on the media, all across the mainstream media. So do you think people are turning to prayer as an answer to that? And if so, what is the Church doing to reach out to those people?
Well, I think in terms of looking for alternatives, it used to be that you could maybe find some comfort from programmes. You could maybe turn on the BBC and have something nice and light rather than the death toll from whatever the latest illness is.
Turn on the BBC? Goodness.
Well, yeah, I know. Remember those good old days. That seems to be a long time ago now since we had anything good coming from the mainstream. And maybe it's just it's a look for comfort. I think people are tired of constant news. They're tired of constant stories that are kind of not raising them up. They're dragging them down. So where do you turn? You have to look inside, I guess, at that point in time. And it reminds me of that Chesterton quote, when men stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything.
Absolutely.
So, where do you turn? Who do you believe in? What's going to be your rock in the middle of all the drifting?
You'll always get brownie points for quoting Chesterton on my show.
Good.
But what is the Church doing about these people that are praying, though? Are they responding to young people in the correct way?
I think they're moving too much with the times. I mean, you yourself know plenty about that.
No comment.
No comment. But I think that one of the headlines I saw today that fascinated me was a new video game where you can play Jesus. You can be Jesus in the early part of his ministry. And I thought, well, that's minorly sacrilegious, but let's sort of peel through the layers. Firstly, the Church is supporting that as a great incentive to evangelisation. And I think that's a strong times. I know you yourself like video games as well, and I don't think there's anything wrong with video games, but I think conflating what is real to many people, belief, faith, fundamentals, and what is a game is where our culture is heading. It's kind of like we're drifting through life, gamifying everything, and that's where the Church is headed as well. I think Christian Church, Catholic Church in this country, both sets of bishops' conferences seem to be more intent on saving the environment and being politically correct rather than actually evangelising.
So frustrating to see them turning away from the scriptures and more towards wokeness. But I've got to ask the question: do you think this could be, this rise in young people praying? Could it be a different type of people praying? Could it be, for example, that the Muslim faith is growing in the United Kingdom?
Well, we know the number one boy's name in the UK now, and it's Mohammed.
John Smith?
It's Mohammed, yes.
Times have changed.
Exactly, but people are praying, and there are different kinds of prayer. There's spiritual prayer, which I think is what most teenagers, maybe agnostic or non-religious teenagers, associate with, which is reaching out to whatever's in the universe and seeing what it throws back. And then there's Christian prayer, which is the fundamental prayer of what the church has always held to be true in this country. And then there's also new faiths. Islam is on the rise, and there are a lot of different sort of what I call pseudo-faiths, people clinging on to worldly things and taking them to be religious objects. Idolatry, we used to call it.
There's a lot of that going on.
But yes, so I think there's also things like the prosperity gospel. If you pray, you're going to get lots of money. It sounds great, doesn't it? But
I think it's fascinating that young people are getting more into prayer, and I think people are now more lost now than they have been in a long time, and I think we need the churches to stand out and reach out to these people and embrace them and encourage them in their prayer and help them sustain their mental well-being and their spiritual well-being too. But thank you so much to Director of Orthodox Conservatives, Joseph Robertson, for joining me in the studio.
Thanks.
You are with GB News on TV, on radio and online. Tomorrow, the next Prime Minister will be announced. Will either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak be a concern to Labour and to the Lib Dems? Could they possibly? We'll find out in a moment. But now it's time for a check on the news headlines with Ray Addison.
.32, here's the latest from the GB newsroom. 2 men have been arrested in connection with the death of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. A 34-year-old has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. Meanwhile, a 41-year-old from Knowsley has been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Olivia died nearly 2 weeks ago after she was shot in her home. Liz Truss is defending her plans to cut the national insurance rise a day before the Conservative Party announces its next leader and therefore our next Prime Minister. Speaking on the BBC's Sunday with Laura Kunsberg programme, she said it was reasonable that the wealthiest received the biggest benefit. Meanwhile, appearing on the same programme, Rishi Sunak said if he becomes PM, he can't rule out introducing electricity blackouts due to rising prices. The Home Secretary says the Met Police must learn from the, quote, appalling mistakes of the past. Writing to the force's new commissioner, Priti Patel stressed the need to restore trust and confidence. It follows a number of high-profile scandals, including the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer. A man has been arrested following an incident that killed an 18-year-old woman and her 8-year-old twin siblings in Dublin. The 3 were taken to Children's Health Island in Crumlin, but were all pronounced dead. Another 14-year-old boy also received serious injuries, which are not believed to be life-threatening. GB News can report that the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has passed 26,000 this year after more than 900 crossed yesterday. The number of crossings have increased in the last couple of days as weather conditions in the Channel improved. More than 200 people have already arrived today. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Father Calvin will be back in just a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Calvin Robinson. Britain's new PM will be announced tomorrow after a long Conservative leadership contest. Liz Truss is expected quite widely to win, but she'll face a whole host of challenges upon entering number 10. Labour currently has a lead in the polls, and the Liberal Democrats sense a revival of fortunes after several by-election victories. But are these successes likely to continue when faced with a new Prime Minister? Joining me now is Professor of Politics and History and former Liberal Democrat councillor Russell Deacon and former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. Now, I want to start with Russell. The Lib Dems seem to be making a little bit of a comeback recently, in local elections at least. Is there a positive future ahead in the general elections for you guys?
I think they're fairly happy at the moment. If you look back a year ago, they were kind of between 7 and 8% in the polls. And now they're between 11 and 14% of the polls. So considering that's, a third increase, they're fairly happy. It's not connected to their historic, 18, 19, 20, even up to 23. But considering the low depths that they plunged to after 2015, they're fairly happy with their poll at the moment.
And do you think they'll be threatened by either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak?
I think it's a very complex situation, as you're probably well aware of from many of the debates that you've been having. It's the way that the country's going at the moment, unless they pull a miracle or, as David Lloyd George used to do, the old Liberal, a rabbit out of the hat, I don't think they'll feel particularly threatened. It feels very much to them like it's two people racing to be captain of the Titanic after it's hit the iceberg. So I don't think they'll be particularly worried about either of the candidates in.
Okay, interesting analogy. Scarlett, the Labour Party, this is their election to lose, frankly, isn't it, at this point? Do you think Keir Starmer is afraid of either Liz or Rishi?
Well, not only are Labour ahead in the polls at the moment, but the polls show that as Prime Minister, he beats both of them, right? That people would rather have him than either. What I expect, given that it's quite likely to be Liz Truss, frankly, what I expect is that Liz Truss will get a bounce and then we'll go back down again. I think most new leaders are given a bounce. So I think that's nothing to worry about. But if you think that today, as you said, that she doesn't mind that tax cuts actually favour the rich. She said more than that, Calvin. What was really worrying was what she said was that taxes have been too redistributive in the last few years. And you think, hold on, the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer. We don't have a redistributive system. So I am worried by Liz Truss. I'm worried about how she's going to run. As you said, a ship that's already hit the iceberg. I'm extremely worried. I'm not worried about how Keir Starmer will do against her.
Scarlett raises a very interesting point. I've got Reem Ibrahim with me in the studio here as well. Scarlett's point is that tax isn't redistributive enough. Do you think actually if we want to enable poorer people to keep more of the money they earn, actually we need to cut taxes rather than redistribute them more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that people need to keep more of their own money in their own pockets. Taxes cut off growth. And, to quote Margaret Thatcher, I think a lot of people on the left don't care if the poor get poorer so long as the rich are less rich.
That seems to be a form of equality that the left often strive towards. Would that be unfair, Russell?
The whole taxation issue is very difficult for the Liberal Democrats, as you can see from the tuition fees debacle, where they didn't actually put in a graduate tax. Instead, they had the loans instead. So they find it a complex. Yeah. It did in fact become a graduate tax, even though it was called, a student loan system. But taxation is very difficult for all political parties because nobody wants to pay any more tax. But on the other hand, where does the money come from?
Good question.
That's the central issue.
Scholars, can we not raise people's income? Can we not encourage people to keep more of the hard money they earn by cutting these taxes? Would that not help us in a cost of living crisis? Why do we need to figure out how to redistribute the taxes? Why can't we bring them down?
Look, about 40% of people in Britain don't pay any tax at all. So as soon as you get tax cuts, you're always going to favour the rich. I do not think that poor people should get poorer. I really resent that, actually. And I don't know anybody on the left who believes it. I absolutely believe that, particularly now.
Do you think rich people should get poorer?
What did you say?
Do you believe rich people should get poorer?
No, what I do think, very, very strongly is at the moment, poor people are getting poorer and rich people are getting richer. That's what I said, right? And actually cutting taxes favours the rich. There's no question about that, particularly as the poorest 40% do not pay tax, right? Either they're on universal credit or they don't earn enough. So actually cutting taxes helps the rich. If that's what Liz Truss is interested in, then that's fine. But let's not pretend that what she really wants to do is to equalise Britain. And the other thing is, this is supposed to be a government interested in levelling up. Well, levelling up is not cutting taxes. Levelling up is actually helping people to pay their bills.
Okay, you said there's no question about that. I would say there is a question about that because it's the middle classes that are getting squeezed in this cost of living crisis. It's the middle classes that are getting wiped out, actually. And cutting taxes does help middle class people keep more of the money that they earn. So I would suggest that is a positive. But Russell, I want to come to you because you're a political historian as well. Is what we're seeing right now in terms of politics unprecedented?
No, we've had 2 world wars, which were, more significant than they are now.
I didn't say more significant, but unprecedented.
It isn't unprecedented. This impact on, as I said, the 2 wars had massive impacts on the whole society structure, everything like that. I think we don't know. Also, there's lots of unknowns. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know what will happen, with the impacts of the war in Ukraine. Everything's unknown. I would say it's very difficult, for any government to come through this because you just don't know what's happening. Can I just pick up on what Scarlett said about taxation? Because the poor people do pay indirect taxes, don't they? VAT. So there's a considerable amount of that as well. So that's another thing, that we talked to cut. And also, if you cut taxes, are you just cutting taxes so that they can pay more, more bills? So, if you get more tax rebated back, what's the difference if you're going to have to spend that all on electricity? It doesn't really make much of an impact, does it? It's not free spending. And again, what the Conservatives want is that free spending to boost the economy so that it goes out there, pushes up all the services. Everyone feels good. Everyone goes out and spends and the economy boosts up. And at the moment, it's the opposite of that. Everything's going to be contracting.
I would argue that as bills are going up to unprecedented amounts, people need more of their own money to afford to pay those bills. And I think if we're relying on government handouts, that's a system that people become dependent on, and it's unhelpful to people who want to break free. But I want to move away from tax a little bit and back to the politics. I want to ask you, Russell, the Conservatives were lent votes in the Red Wall, and a lot of people will be wondering where to put those votes to in the next election. I'll come to you with this one as well in a moment, Scarlett. But for people who can no longer vote Conservative because they feel that either Brexit was Brexit in name only, or that they feel that the Conservatives have piddled away an 80-strong majority and not done anything with it, for those people, what are the Lib Dems going to do to attract their votes?
I would say in politics, what people do normally is they vote for the party they think is going to win. So if they're in a seat where it's Labour's the main challenger, even if they feel very sympathetic to Liberal Democrat policies, and they want to get the Conservatives out, that's the way they'll go. What it'll be the opposite in other seats where the Liberal Democrats are the main challenger. Then Labour will be, as you say, lending their votes maybe to the Liberals. That's normally the way that people go, is their rational choice model of voting. so they'll vote for that. So the Liberal Democrat appeal in those red wall seats, they probably won't be concentrating too much on them. There'll be a whole host of other seats which are more marginal, where they'll be pushing their message there.
OK, and the last question to Scarlett, similar question, but for people that can no longer vote Conservative, but also are struggling to vote Labour because Labour wanted the same things as the Conservative government over lockdown, you know, harder, stronger, more lockdowns, and they wanted the opposition to stand up for their civil liberties and actually provide some opposition. How is Labour going to turn around and attract those votes?
I actually don't think that lockdown is of interest to many people at the moment. What they're interested in is the future, how they're going to pay their bills, how they're going to get through. And actually on that, then there really is a difference between the Labour Party and the Conservatives. I mean, as you said, I mean, the Conservatives are offering tax breaks that only affect the top 60%, whereas Labour is saying, you know, that what we should be doing is freezing the energy price cap so that nobody, whether they're rich or poor, have to pay these amazing bills, and that we need to get it from a windfall tax. So I think that what people are doing is they're looking to the future, and they're looking, frankly, to how they're going to survive the next year or two. And the parties are very, very different, particularly if Liz Truss gets to be Prime Minister.
OK, absolutely smashing analysis from you both. Thank you so much for joining me. Professor of Politics and History, Russell Deacon, and former Labour advisor, Scarlett Maguire. Cheers very much. Now, I'm still joined in the studio by Reem Ibrahim. Thank you, first of all, Reem, for being here. But Scarlett suggests that people are interested in economics and not lockdowns. I tend to think that people are capable of being interested in more than one issue during an election. What do you think is going to be on people's minds?
I think, I actually agree with her. I think that actually the COVID lockdown is, you know, it had a huge impact on my mental health. I think as a young person, it really impacted my education. A lot of my first year of university was taught online. These things stick in our memories. But at the same time, when you can't pay your energy bills, you know, I think 1/3 of households now are struggling to pay their energy bills. That's before we've hit the winter, where, you know, we know that prices are going to skyrocket. That's where the key issue is. I think when people can't warm their own homes, that's really going to be the most important issue. And Liz Truss has a massive task to really get this sorted and show the country that actually free markets are the solution.
OK, thank you, Reem. Lots of you have been getting in touch about this issue as well today, so let's have a look at what some of you have been saying. Political commentator Reem Ibrahim is with me throughout, so I'll go back to her for further opinions. But on the migrant crisis, John says, with reference to the illegal migrants, the UK should leave the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, and overturn any other laws that prevent us from deporting them. This government will come to its senses when it is too late to rectify the situation. Before I move on, Reem, what do you think?
I think that the migrant issue is we need government to sort of really distinguish between the economic and the genuine refugees. I just don't want the taxpayer to be paying for the migrants to be housed up in nice hotels.
The thing I just keep getting stuck on is I don't understand how we have any genuine refugees entering the United Kingdom from a safe country such as France. It doesn't make any sense to me. David offers his solution for solving the migrant crisis. Perhaps the answer to the illegal crossings is the opening of a consulate immigration office in Calais, staffed and trained by immigration officers on the understanding that only those with visas will be allowed into UK. Interesting point, but isn't the problem here that the French government don't want these illegal immigrants either, so that's why they willingly let them across? We saw the other day, didn't we, when they slashed one of the boats, one of the dinghies, it prevented the crime from happening. It prevented the illegal people smugglers from doing their business. Should the French government be doing more of that?
I think they need to be able to protect their own borders as well. And I don't particularly care what the French government do. I think that it's our problem. If they're crossing over, of course we can put pressure on the French government, but at the same time, if we're not able to protect our own borders, we can't be relying on other countries to do it for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on Edinburgh deciding against the removal of historic statues, Rebecca says, like any nation, our culture was created by its people for its people, and now we welcome people from all around the world. Any removal is destruction of history. Get over it. What's your stance on the whole political statue situation?
Look, I think that we've got so many historical figures that have said horrible things. I'm sure that in 100 years' time, somebody will be looking back at our news show, Calvin, and saying that we're saying horrible things.
Oh, I think they're already saying that right now. Some people.
Exactly, but also I think that you've got to look at history holistically. Yeah. I'm from North Africa. I'm half Egyptian, half Moroccan. Yeah. We had the Barbary slave trade. So does that mean that we now need to apologise to the British and the French people that we stole off their islands from the 16th and 19th century? You know, history goes both ways. Just because that the British were much better at containing their empire and actually much more efficient at it, doesn't mean we need to be apologising for these things and tearing down history.
Are you going to apologise on behalf of the North Africans?
Yes, I'm so sorry to all those from the 19th century, those people that were engaged in that slave trade.
I'm sure they're thankful for your apology. Now, the BBC has been met with criticism after ordering senior journalist Neil Henderson to delete tweets questioning why Gary Lineker was able to air his political views so publicly when others at the organisation cannot. Henderson asked whether the Match of the Day star's contract allowed him to be so prolific in his political tweeting, whilst all other employees are held to such strict standards. Let me read you Neil Henderson's public apology on Twitter. I'd like to apologise for earlier tweets, now deleted, responding to Gary Lineker. I should have shown more consideration to a BBC colleague as per the BBC's social media guidelines. The argument sparked debate on both the BBC's practice and workplace culture. With me now to discuss this incredible issue is Martin Daubney, journalist and former Brexit Party MEP and good friend of mine. Martin, thank you very much for joining me. The BBC yet again showing its bias, not just to the viewers this time, but to its own staff.
Yeah, and you have to say, for starters, Neil Henderson is a highly respected BBC employee. A lot of us follow him on Twitter because he puts tomorrow's newspapers out early, which is really handy for journalists. And he's quite entitled to criticise Lineker. And by the way, didn't his apology have all the authenticity, almost like one of those ISIS hostage videos? Now, here's a guy who's been like frog-marched out and forced to apologise. It's demeaning for him. And he's only saying what a shed load of BBC employees that I know are thinking, and certainly what a lot of the general public are thinking, because the BBC impartiality laws are once again proven to be absolutely worthless, at least when it comes to Saint Lineker, who can ride roughshod over them. He's proven that he's above them because the defence he pulled was, well, I don't work in current affairs or politics, so I can say what I want. Just like before he said, well, I'm freelance for tax purposes. I don't work for the BBC, so I can say what I want. Now, we know Martin. The BBC has a huge problem with impartiality, and this is certainly true when you look at the guests. The top 10 guests of BBC Question Time this week were revealed all as Remainers. 2/3 of the guests on Question Time throughout the entire Brexit debate, when I was often on there as the only Brexiteer in the village, were Remainers. They got a terrible problem with bias. Emily Maitlis has proven that at the Edinburgh event the other day. She's quite clearly now free to speak her mind. And on the one hand, Lineker is an absolute disgrace. He scored a last-minute winner as being the most ridiculous celebrity on the planet. Meghan Markle should have bagged that one, but you can always bank on Lineker to get a last-minute goal. And what he's doing is making people really question the integrity of the BBC licence fee. Calvin, it's something I know that you're passionate about, and you and I have spoken about before. And I think I'm for free speech. So let's hear what Lineker's got to say, and we can then make our own mind up, because the best solution is simply to stop paying your BBC licence fee and instead to watch GB News.
Well said, Martin. I mean, I have to say Gary Lineker is one of my people, so I have to defend him as a fellow black man. But Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC, said he was going to clamp down on all of this stuff, these opinionated columnists and partisan campaigners. But is it not the problem that there are too many loopholes at the BBC and certain people are too big to be touched? And Lineker's just one of very many.
Yeah, I mean, he's the highest earner. He's one of the biggest box office draws. And as I say, he's got all these clever defences. He doesn't work in current affairs. He's freelance. And it really makes a mockery of it. If the impartiality laws aren't applied to all employees universally, then we don't have anything worth the paper it's written on. And I think that's the issue. A lot of people have had a great awakening about the fact that woke capitalists like Lineker, who, by the way, if pensioners can't afford to pay their BBC licence fee this winter, which includes Gary Lineker's massive salary, they could face spending the winter inside a jail cell. That's the power that Lineker has. He can say what he wants, and if you don't pay a salary, you could end up in prison. And
it's too much, and we need to
woke scream.
We need to defund the BBC.
And he's a capitalist that plays the game. Climate change, you name it. He plays every defence to defend this huge salary, Calvin.
Absolutely. Martin, I could not have said it better myself. Hashtag defund the BBC. That is Martin Daubney, journalist and fantastic former Brexit Party MEP. Thank you very much. You have been watching Real Britain with me, Calvin Robinson. Thank you so much for joining in. Thank you for your company, and thank you for your emails and comments. The show is on every Saturday and Sunday at 2 p.m. For now, I'm going to leave you with the weather. God bless.
This evening, UK weather is looking unsettled as low pressure sits to the west of us, bringing in spells of rain. Let's take a look at the details. Southwest England will see further showers. Some could be heavy and perhaps thundery too, turning windy for a time as well, especially around the coasts. Mostly dry across southeast England and London, with clear spells and generally light winds. The possibility of a few showers, mainly in the north. An increasing risk of showery rain across southern parts of Wales this evening. This could be heavy in places and perhaps thundery too, turning windy. Mostly cloudy this evening across the Midlands, with an increasing risk of a few showers, which could be on the heavy side. Feeling quite humid as well, with temperatures around 19 Celsius and winds staying light. A mixed end to the day for the northeast England. There'll be a risk of a few showers, though most places should stay dry. Winds staying light, with temperatures around 21 Celsius. A mainly dry evening for southern parts of Scotland, with plenty of clear spells and generally light winds. The risk of a few light showers, mainly in the east. A largely dry end to the day across Northern Ireland, with just some fair weather cloud around. A fairly low risk of an isolated shower later on towards the coast. Overnight, bands of heavy rain and brisk winds will move northwards. A warm and muggy night with temperatures staying in double figures. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel, and every